Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda. And thanks
Hello,
for
David.
joining us when you've got COVID. You're a trooper beyond compare.
Thank you so much. I would never disappoint our podcast listeners or you. And I would invite our podcast listeners from around the world, throughout the galaxy, to the Feeling Good podcast. And today is episode 462. Dave, can you just explain what this is?
No, I refuse.
Okay, well, then it'll just be a big surprise for people.
I'm just pulling your leg. Yes, I'd be thrilled to explain what's going on here. On July 9th, Dr. Jill Levitt and I did a free 2-hour webinar on perfectionism, and it was very, very well received. And it's being published. Also, we're going to publish it free on YouTube as a single continuous video with audio. And then we thought it might also be nice to share it with you folks as a two-part podcast. So today is going to be part one of that webinar, and we're going to talk about the emotional consequences of perfectionism, how to identify the perfectionistic beliefs that fuel anxiety, procrastination, and shame, how and why these beliefs can trigger intense emotional pain, and how to use positive reframing and the cost-benefit analysis to melt away your own resistance to change. And then next week, we're going to go into the various methods for treating perfectionism. But I would love to have some feedback with you folks if this is a good way for us to devote 2 podcasts to these webinars, because we're going to be doing a lot of the webinars, and we can turn them all into 2-part podcasts if you like. But since they're also going to be available on YouTube, it might be overexposure. And if you went to the webinar for free and did it live already, you might prefer that we not use the podcast for this purpose, because we've got plenty of podcast topics to go over. So let us know, but we love you all, and thanks for listening today, and we hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you. And David, even though it's a little embarrassing for me to read, I thought I would read an endorsement from Michael, who wrote about the personal work episode I did, 459. And I got a lot of emails from people, and this was a particularly touching one, so I thought it would be fun to share. Hello, Dr. Burns. I found myself choked up and blown away by Dr. Borowski's humility and openness during her live therapy work. She has been going through an experience I imagine has been terrifying, frustrating, and saddening for her, dealing with the diagnosis of cancer and the subsequent treatment and the side effects, which reduced her ability to do many of the things she enjoys. And yet, through that suffering, she has gifted me and many others the chance to experience the power in vulnerability. I was choked up by Rhonda's willingness to be open about her flaws, and it reinforced for me that it is important to be open and vulnerable, because that way you can filter out who won't be good for you much quicker. And while I felt sad to hear of Rhonda's cancer diagnosis, and I feel sad and angry that she has to go through this turmoil, I do not feel pity toward her, because I know the cancer picked the wrong person to crop up in, because she's quite the fighter. Sincerely, Michael.
Michael, thank you for that. And Rhonda, thank you for reading it. And thank you for giving so much of yourself, even today when you're struggling with COVID and need to get back to bed. You say the show must go on. And,
right.
And so there are so many of us love you and appreciate you greatly.
Yeah. And I love you, David. And I'm so grateful to you and Matt for doing that work with me. it was definitely life-changing.
Yeah, it was a real joy for us to connect with you on that level and with all of you out there. So thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week for part 2 of the Perfectionism Seminar.
Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today, Overcoming Perfectionism, CBT Tools for Mastering the Art of Self-Acceptance. I'm really excited to be here today presenting with David Burns, and we have a lot of exciting material to cover in the next 2 hours, packed with hopefully some powerful and practical tools. We'll be sharing with you some videos, some role play demonstrations, and even including some exercises for you to do with us. And we'll take some questions at the end. And also later in the session, I'll share with you how you can take your skills even further if you like what you're learning today. So I'll start actually by welcoming and introducing David Burns. So David is my dear friend. Hi, David. Want to say hi? David is my dear friend and colleague, and certainly one of the most influential figures in cognitive behavioral therapy, and the creator of TEAM CBT, the model that we'll be sharing a lot more with you about today. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Feeling Good, Feeling Great, the Feeling Great app, which we'll also tell you more about today, and really the driving force behind everything that we're teaching at the Feeling Good Institute. So I'm super honored to have a chance to teach with David today. I'll also tell you just a little bit about who we are at Feeling Good Institute. Our mission is to elevate the practice of therapy so that patients can recover faster and more fully, and we train and certify therapists in TEAM CBT, a powerful framework developed by David, and we help therapists progress through a structured kind of 5-level certification path. And the Feeling Good Institute was founded by myself and my colleagues, Angela Crum and Maor Katz. And we all trained with David at Stanford. And back then when we were training, the only way really to learn TEAM CBT was with David directly. And oftentimes it took many, many years. And so we kind of started Feeling Good Institute with this dream of helping to make David's framework, TEAM CBT, and tools and techniques more accessible to more therapists without compromising the quality of the training. And so everything that we do today still reflects that original intention of spreading TEAM CBT and helping therapists to get better. And we don't just teach TEAM CBT techniques, we really try hard to replicate David's training style, which is built on one idea, which is that therapists only get better through practice and feedback. And so it might surprise you to hear this, but experience alone, as shown on this slide, doesn't make therapists better. So just doing more sessions and having more years under your belt doesn't actually lead to better outcomes. But what we know actually does work is learning, practicing, getting feedback, and continuously repeating that cycle. And so that's what we emphasize in all of our trainings. And that's actually what you'll be having a bit of a chance to do today as well. And so before we jump in, I just have one kind of thought experiment kind of question for you. It's really a moment of kind of self-reflection. So we've talked about how experience alone doesn't lead to better outcomes, and that real growth comes from learning and practice. So imagine what would change for you as a therapist if you had a way to continuously improve your skills kind of week after week? And would that be worth it to you to explore something like that? And so at the end of the workshop today, if you liked what we taught and if you're interested in improving your skills, we'll share with you this course that we've developed that's called the Fast Track to TEAM CBT Level 3, where we really help people to learn the skills of TEAM CBT quickly and efficiently, where it doesn't take years and years, but rather just months. And at the end of the webinar today, we'll share with all of you kind of 2 different things. We are aware that there are a lot of therapists here today, but there's also members of the general public. So David's going to share with you the awesome Feeling Great app. And then I will share with you the Fast Track course, one of our courses to help you become a better therapist. So here's what we're planning to cover today. These 2 learning objectives and lots more. And actually, we'll start today with a poll so that we can learn a little bit more about who you guys are and why you're attending the webinar today. So let me launch the poll, which is tell us about yourself. So our first question is, are you here to learn how to help yourself with your perfectionism and your self-critical tendencies? You can answer that with a yes or no. And then in addition, because many people are here for both, are you here to learn how to help someone else? That could be a loved one, or that could be your patients with their perfectionism and self-critical tendencies. And honestly, David and I love teaching this workshop because we're aware that all of us as human beings, or most of us, struggle with perfectionism, being hard on ourselves. And so we gather, many of you are here to both learn skills to help others, but also to help yourself. So David, I'll end the poll and I'll share the results of the poll here so you can see them. So we have 74% of people are saying they are here to learn how to help themselves with their perfectionism and self-critical tendencies. So we're in good company with 74% of people wanting to learn some tools to help themselves. And then even more than that, 93% are here to learn how to help someone else with perfectionism and self-criticism. Okay, let me close the poll. And I'll cover one more slide here, and then I'll also turn things over to David so he can share more. This slide kind of covers the TEAM CBT model. So TEAM CBT is not a school of therapy, but rather a framework for kind of how all effective therapy works. And it's based on these kind of 4 elements. The T in TEAM stands for testing, and that means that we use measures at the beginning and end of every session with every patient to really tune in to our patient, understand the symptoms that are coming up for them, and then also to get feedback from our patients after every session about how we're doing. We can look at how patients change from beginning to end of session, and then also how patients change over time to make sure that we're doing really good and effective therapy. And the E in TEAM stands for empathy, and that's that we use a kind of toolbox that David's developed called the 5 Secrets of Effective Communication to really connect with all of our patients, and especially the ones that are really hard to connect with. And the testing and empathy we won't be covering today, so that's kind of part of the framework. But what we're going to be focusing on today is the A and the M, assessment of resistance. That's the idea that we assume that all patients are at least partly ambivalent about change, that there are sometimes good reasons not to change. And so we bring kind of resistance to conscious awareness, we melt it away and really boost motivation to change before we move into the M, which is methods. And we'll be sharing with you a lot of methods today, actually, in a really short period of time for bringing about kind of rapid and profound and meaningful change. So we'll be sharing a lot about the A and M today. Can I turn it over to you for a little bit, David?
Yeah, the perfectionism is just one of many self-defeating beliefs that can trigger feelings of depression, anxiety, or conflict in relationships. But what many self-defeating beliefs are, really, they're including perfectionism, perceived perfectionism, and the achievement addiction, and so many others, they're really self-esteem equations. What they're saying is, I need substance X to feel happy and worthwhile. And then substance X could be perfectionism, have to be perfect, or it could be achievement. My worthwhileness as a human being depends on my achievements. And I've often thought of that as a problem in Western civilization, the kind of Calvinist work ethic that you are what you do. And I imagine that those traditions were different. Recently, both of my books, Feeling Good and Feeling Great, have been released in China, and I've been doing a lot of interviews in China in the last few weeks. And they're very excited about TEAM CBT. But in particular, I think that unfortunately they have that same problem with perfectionism and achievement addiction that we have here in the U.S. with a lot of young Chinese individuals struggling with feeling like they're not good enough, they haven't achieved enough, and experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety. And what's really cool is that finally these things are being talked about in China and receiving a lot of excitement and attention. But X could also be the approval addiction. A lot of us have the fear of disapproval, fear of criticism, and feel like if someone's criticizing me, it means I can't be happy. It means I'm not worthwhile. And then another huge one is the love addiction. I must be loved to feel happy and worthwhile. And you can find a list of 23 of these self-defeating beliefs in your handout on page 3, and you might want to circle the numbers for some of them that you can identify with. Most people find that they can identify with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 8, or even more of these self-defeating beliefs on page 3. You might enjoy going through that. That list has become, I would say, almost as popular as my list of the 10 basic cognitive distortions. And so we're going to do a second poll. I'll turn it back to Jill for this poll. But some of the key beliefs in perfectionism are perfectionism perceived per se, and that's the idea that I must be perfect, as well as perceived perfectionism, which is a term I coined that has to do with the belief that you expect me to be perfect. I have to impress you with my achievements in order to be loved and cared about and respected. That's perceived perfectionism. And the achievement addiction is that you base your self-esteem on your intelligence, your accomplishments, your achievements. And then the approval addiction is very much related to perfectionism, that other people won't love and approve of me if I screw up, if I'm not really a huge achiever, if I'm really not doing things perfectly. So let us know what, if any, or many of these four key beliefs you might have.
And I'll just remind people that, so the poll is running and I'll end it in just a moment. So let me end the poll here and share the results. And we can see, David, that 56% of people said they have perfectionism, 45% perceived perfectionism, 53% achievement addiction, and 56% approval addiction. So, and again, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So many people have many of these self-defeating beliefs.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, the cognitive model is really a beautiful model, and I think it's not appreciated nearly enough. People think, cognitive therapy has something to do with thoughts, and they don't go much further with that than that. But it's a very precise model, and the way the self-defeating beliefs, SDBs, Albert Ellis called them irrational beliefs. Karen Horney talked about them in the early 1900s as well. She was a famous feminist psychiatrist, talked about the approval addiction and the achievement addiction. But the way it works is that the self-defeating beliefs are a part of your value system. They're always operating in the background. But it's the combination of a self-defeating belief plus an upsetting event that triggers distorted thoughts. So, for example, let's say I have the achievement addiction and perfectionism, which is a very common combo. and I screw up in today's workshop and get some kind of hostile or sharp question that at the end, or some feedback which is biting, then I need to be perfect. I need everyone's approval, but I don't get it. And that then triggers the distorted thoughts, which come up only when we're upset. And then I might be telling myself, wow, I really screwed up today. I'm a loser. And these thoughts we're going to feel about 100% true. And that's why they're so painful, because we believe them as much as the fact that there's skin on our hands. It seems obvious. We don't realize that they're just stemming from a self-defeating belief and that they're chock full of distortions. And I'd be thinking, boy, people are going to be looking down on me. I'm just not good enough, and end up with I'm a failure. And so those thoughts will then be triggering all kinds of negative feelings, such as depression, anxiety, shame, powerful feelings of shame, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of loneliness, as well as feelings of hopelessness. Now, do you want to dive into the AA, Jill?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So now you have a sense of, what are self-defeating beliefs and kind of how they operate. And so the A in TEAM, we said, is the assessment of resistance. It's really the reducing resistance kind of step and boosting motivation. And so kind of overall in the TEAM CBT model, when we're working on resistance with patients, our goal is to help our patients to feel proud of their symptoms. We don't think of resistance as what's wrong with our patients, but actually kind of what's right about our patients. If we can help them to identify kind of good reasons to hang on to their self-defeating beliefs and what they show about them that are kind of beautiful and awesome, or how they're a reflection of their values, how they work for them, then oftentimes they'll actually be in the role of arguing for change. So our goal is to become the voice of our patients' subconscious resistance. And that often opens the door to rapid change by transforming their shame. I shouldn't be so hard on myself, to actually feeling kind of proud of themselves for having, let's say, high standards or expecting great things of themselves.
And that dimension, I would say, was totally absent from early cognitive therapy. And that was why all the outcome studies with cognitive therapy, as well as every other known form of psychotherapy for depression, have only limited effectiveness, getting substantial improvement in only half of patients. And it's because half of patients will subconsciously or consciously resist. And so then the cognitive techniques, or any helpful techniques, aren't going to be very effective. So the assessment of resistance, or paradoxical agenda setting, is a dimension that I added after years of research and clinical work. And it's really the most unique and key part of TEAM CBT. And it's also a paradoxical technique, because it doesn't work through helping the patient, but rather persuading the patient not to change. It's really incredibly powerful, but hard for many therapists and many patients to grasp at first, because it's so unfamiliar to the regular helping role that we think therapists are always supposed to be in.
Yeah, and so we're going to share with you actually a couple of different tools today for addressing resistance and for reducing your own resistance if you're here to work on yourself. And the first one that we're going to share with you guys is called the Perfectionism cost-benefit analysis. And of course, you could do a cost-benefit analysis actually with any negative thought or feeling, but we're showing you how to do one with a self-defeating belief, the Perfectionism CBA today. So if you turn to page 6 in your handout packet, the Perfectionism cost-benefit analysis, we're going to encourage you to try this exercise with us right now, where you're going to list the advantages as well as the disadvantages of telling yourself, I should always try to be either like I should always be try to be perfect, or you could be more specific. I should always try to be a perfect therapist, or teacher or mother, daughter, etc. So at the top of the page, it says actually that the belief you're trying to change is I should always try to be perfect. And then we want you to take a minute to try to write down what are some benefits of telling yourself I should always try to be perfect, and start with that side. And then we can always move on to the costs or the disadvantages. And something that's so important and that so many people make a mistake of is this is not the advantages or disadvantages of being perfect. I gather many of us could think of lots of great reasons to be perfect. It's the advantages and disadvantages of always trying to be perfect, right? Of putting that pressure on myself that I should be perfect.
And ask yourself, how will that belief help you emotionally, behaviorally, in terms of the quality of your work, in terms of your relationships with other people, and so forth. There's probably at least 10 or 20 or 30 or more overpowering advantages of perfectionism. And that's one of the reasons for resistance, is because sometimes the very thing that's the root of our horrific despair and intense negative feelings and frustrations is something that has been secretly rewarding us in many, many ways. So first, in the left-hand column, list the advantages of trying to be perfect. Like, does it motivate you? What happens when you achieve something great? How do you feel? List all of those things. And then once you've listed at least 3 or 5 or more benefits of this belief, I should always try to be perfect in my therapy work, in my research, in my teaching. And then ask yourself, is there a downside? What price do I pay for that belief in terms of my emotions, my self-esteem, my relationships with other people, my work, the quality and quantity of my productivity, and my spirituality, really, as a human being. And there's plenty of disadvantages, and we're not trying to stack the game here in favor of the advantages or disadvantages. I just want you to write down a number of advantages that click for you and a number of disadvantages that seem realistic as well.
And then what we're going to ask you to do is, if you'd like to share your perfectionism cost benefit. Oh, actually, sorry. Well, we have one more step, and then we'll ask for you to share. After you've listed the advantages of telling yourself I must be perfect and the disadvantages of that belief system, then you're going to take 100 points and divide them, take 100 points and divide it into 2, right? How many points would you give to the advantages side? How many points would you give to the disadvantages side? And it doesn't mean that you're adding up how many items, because sometimes one really powerful advantage can weigh more than several disadvantages, or vice versa. So take 100 points and divide them between the 2. Is it 60-40? Is it 20-80? And then once you've done that, if you'd like to share with us, and it'll just be a very brief share, you'll tell us kind of what were some advantages and what were some disadvantages, and how you rated the points. Send a note in the chat box, just I'd like to volunteer. And then Mike will call on someone to actually share we'll enable your audio and give you a chance to share with the group your perfectionism cost-benefit analysis. So we're not asking you to share the details of it in the chat, but rather just put in the chat, I'd like to share mine, and then Mike can unmute you.
Well, it looks like we've got Rachel here. I'm just going to highlight Rachel. Allow to talk, and I'm just going to...
I think I've been unmuted.
There we go. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel.
Okay. Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you.
If does your top of your CBA, does it just say I should always try to be perfect? Was it a perfect mother, a perfect, anything?
Yeah, so I actually did perfect therapist / parent. So I kind of was keeping it as both to try to keep the ideas in mind. So we could either pick one or do both, but I think they apply to both. And then same thing, the drawbacks or disadvantages of telling self I should always try to be the perfect therapist or parent.
Perfect. So perfect. So share with us what were some advantages? How to start with the advantages?
Okay, so for advantages, I said it pushes me to do and learn more. I also said it helps to make me a better parent or therapist by trying to push myself to be the quote unquote perfect parent or therapist.
Yeah. So pushes me to do and learn more, kind of pushes me to be better.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then another advantage, how do you feel when you score a home run, Rachel?
I feel good. Yeah, that's a good point.
Is that a benefit?
Yes, definitely. I feel good when I've gone to something like this and I feel like I get more CEUs, or I feel good when I read a book like the Let Them Theory and I feel like, okay, this is good for my parenting and for my being a therapist. So yeah, I do feel good.
Yeah, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any disadvantages you found in that mindset?
Yeah, so I think leaning toward the idea of perfect, I think that can bring on lower self-esteem because obviously I'm never going to be the perfect parent or therapist because I believe there's no such thing. And so it can lead me to feeling worse about myself. I can never really feel like I'm having an achievement or a success because these are minor successes, but I'm not going to achieve perfection. So I feel like I would never actually like fully achieve being the perfect therapist. And then some like depressed, negative feelings, like feeling down about myself as a parent or therapist. And also I wrote, I may not have as good of a work-life balance because if I like constantly trying to, let's say, be a better therapist and focus so much on that, then I might not be as quote unquote good of a parent because I'm not as available because I'm focused more on being the quote unquote perfect therapist.
Those are beautiful lists. Was there anything about relationships on the advantages side or disadvantages side? For example, on the advantages side, if you're trying to be perfect and then you do some awesome work, some people are going to admire you.
Yes, definitely. I appreciate feeling admired. And even with my kids, if I'm hitting home runs with spending time with them and making them a focus. And so that feels really good. Also a disadvantage though, if I'm spending more time on one than the other, that could be not feeling so good in my relationships.
Right, as well perhaps as not having a chance to experience real closeness.
Mm-hmm.
There can sometimes be a little bit of loneliness with being a high achiever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, how did you rate these two? Is it 50-50, 60-40, 40-60?
I actually gave, again, I think it's a piece of focusing on like the word perfectionism or perfect, but I gave the drawback disadvantages 60 and I gave the benefits 40.
Great.
Because it just felt weighted in the like negative more than weighted in the positive.
Well, that's
but
awesome.
I do feel like I get benefits from it professionally and also personally.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analysis. Now, Jill, when you give us the 40-60, you're giving us permission to continue working with you to change this belief, and we have a lot of wonderful techniques to do that. But what would we do, Rachel or Jill, if it was the other way around, and if it was 60-40? What position would we take? What would we say to our patient or colleague or son or daughter or whatever?
Would you like to take a stab at it, Rachel?
Obviously, this is working for you. Overall, you're gaining more benefit than you're losing. And so this is bigger picture working for you more, but not completely. And so should we look at the other side and figure out if there's work to be done there and any change that you would want to make?
That was really great, except for right at the end. What's another way we could bring it to conclusion, Jill?
Yeah, and Rachel, by the way, I do love what you said. But yeah, you started out strong in this idea of if the advantages are greater than the disadvantages, then this must actually be working for you more than it's hurting you. And so maybe that isn't something that we should actually try to change, right? Maybe it's actually serving you well. And we do what we call sitting with open hands, right? I'm not going to try to convince you to change this perfectionism. Kind of sounds like it's working for you. So is there something else you might want my help with? And then quite often the patient will kind of chase you and go, no, actually, let me revise that a little bit because it actually is super painful or it's not that motivating or, but if they don't and they're in agreement that it's working more than it's costing, then kind of we don't want to push them to give it up.
And this is called sitting with open hands, and it's the key mindset in TEAM CBT. And it's one of the things that's hardest for therapists to accept because therapists don't want to accept that a patient might not want whatever they're marketing, according to their most recent workshop. But all the power of TEAM comes from grasping and endorsing this idea of sitting with open hands. But this is not a game. I can remember when I was a psychiatric resident, I was walking with John Rush, who was a wonderful person. He is a famous biological psychiatrist, I think, at the Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, and he's had a very illustrious career, and he was in my class. And I remember him saying, David, I feel so sorry for these therapists who think they have to be perfect and cure everybody. And I said, oh, yes, John, it's so pathetic. You're absolutely right about that. There's no mileage in trying to be perfect. That's what I said to him because it seemed like the socially correct thing to say. But what I was thinking in my head was, that's okay for you, John. You shouldn't try to be perfect. But David is quite a different kettle of fish. And I am going to try to see if I can cure every one of my patients. And I was hooked on perfectionism in my clinical work and in my research. And it took me a number of years before it finally dawned on me that John was right in his wisdom and that I had fallen into a kind of a trap. But it was very, very rewarding. And so you don't want to minimize the potential power of the resistance. And if you honor that rather than try to manipulate it, you'll have much greater effectiveness as a therapist and much greater satisfaction in your clinical work.
And David, the third one, right, we were going to talk about, which is what happens if the two are equal.
Yeah, what are we going to do there, Jill or Rachel?
I'll take Rachel off the hot seat.
Yeah, Jill, I feel like you have the perfect answer. No,
no, but first, actually, I was just going to say thank you to Rachel for volunteering. Yeah. That was an awesome example that you walked us through, so we really appreciate that. And
you're welcome. My pleasure.
And so what do we do if they're equal? Well, in truth, it's pretty similar to what we just said, which is I would say something like, well, I can see that there are definitely some disadvantages and that it's hurting you. And at the same time, there are some really significant benefits to this perfectionism, and it is serving you really well. And since it's so much work to actually change, perhaps it doesn't make sense for us to change that. You'd have to really convince me that it was worth it to you to change. At this point, it's looking equal. So again, sitting with open hands while acknowledging that both sides are looking similar.
And as an aside, I might say that some of the techniques we teach are really well set up to be done in groups. In fact, we did this one in groups. It's just that we won't have time to talk with each of you about your analysis and brainstorm. This could go into a 30 or 45-minute discussion. But this is a great tool to use in groups, whether you're a teacher in a high school or in a college or even in a middle school. That this is a great way to connect, because just so many young people in America and in China and worldwide are struggling with perfectionism. There's so much pressure in our society for achievement and having a perfect body and a perfect this and a perfect that this is a very painless and fun way for people to ease into this topic.
Okay, and so there are lots of methods that we have for changing self-defeating beliefs. Someone even messaged me around, can you hold on to some parts of the belief and change others, which is kind of called the semantic technique. But we're going to share with you a couple of methods for changing perfectionism in particular in just a minute. But we're going to walk through, before we do that, kind of other resistance busting tools that you can use as well. And so this kind of sequence is dealing with, again, what we call outcome resistance. It's this idea of like, would you really want to give up your perfectionism and be feeling good about yourself exactly as you are right now? And so we'll talk you through right now the magic button, the pivot question, the positive reframing, and the magic dial. But we're going to do that by first introducing you to a therapist that we did some personal work with named Amy, who was struggling with perfectionism. And so, David, you want to say a little bit about Amy, and then Amy will introduce herself in this slide as well.
Amy was a beloved member of our Tuesday group for a couple of years at least, and has a practice in the East Coast, and she's on the voluntary faculty of one of the top medical schools in the country. And she was specializing in short-term treatment of anxiety disorders. But she came to Jill and David not long ago, really in tears after having a sleepless night and days of extreme anxiety and beating up on herself tremendously. And you'll learn more about this in just a few minutes, because she was stuck with two of her patients. And although she was doing great in her clinical practice, had a booming practice of many patients getting just blow-away ratings and doing rapid recovery with the vast majority of her patients, she was ripping herself to shreds because of the fact that she was stuck with these two patients. And the intensity of her emotions, which you'll see in just a few minutes, was off the chart. But let's hear what Amy has to say. She's always been one of my favorite people. She's such a beautiful, down to earth, kindly person.
I guess I've always been somebody who really spends a lot of time thinking about my patients outside of session and worrying about how they're doing, and very invested in whether they're feeling better or not. So when I have a session where they leave feeling really good, I just feel great. And then especially when there's somebody that I've been working with for a while who's then feeling stuck, that just is like this weight that I carry all the time in the rest of my life. So as I'm doing things with my family, it's still there, this weight of, there's this person I'm working with who's struggling, and I just feel that so heavily, and I'm constantly thinking about that person, and what can I do differently? What haven't I thought of yet? What different perspective might be helpful here? What different method could I try? What might I be missing? And so I'm spending lots of time just ruminating about that, especially as I'm trying to fall asleep at night. That's just a constant broken record in my head.
What is the worst part about all of this to you?
When I'm worried, thinking about my patients who aren't doing well, I have done a downward arrow for myself with that.
Yeah.
What if?
I feel a little embarrassed sharing it because I realize how absurd it is. But it gets down to what if I'm somehow responsible for them feeling so hopeless that they kill themselves, and then I could never live with that guilt.
Yeah.
I've
also had some beautiful comments from Michael Harmon and others, how touched they are. Right.
Yeah.
But that there you met got a glimpse of Amy's inner beauty, and as well as the intensity of her suffering. And her daily mood log that she presented us with was that, being unable to sleep at night, and then the next day she saw 2 patients in a row who were feeling very stuck and discouraged. And she did this on paper, and this is a tool that you always want to do on paper, because when you write down your negative thoughts at a specific moment, there's tremendous illumination and learning and growth is possible. If you try to do this in your head, you won't have much luck. And I remember that's one of the first things I included in my book, Feeling Good, that came out in 1980. So I must have written that in 1978 or 1979. But it's just as true today. And you can see that she was feeling sad, 80%, anxious, worried, and nervous, 80%. Guilty, remorseful, and bad, 90%, incompetent and inadequate, 100%, discouraged, 90%, and stuck, 80%. And although she's a fully functioning psychiatrist carrying a heavy load of patients and an active family life at the same time, these scores are comparable to someone if you went into the Stanford inpatient psychiatric unit and asked these estimates from somebody who's receiving electroconvulsive therapy. They wouldn't be a whole lot more severe than this. And this helps us greatly initially when working with someone to appreciate just the incredible intensity of their feelings, because otherwise you can be deceived by Amy's warmth and smile and think that she's mildly distressed, but she's not. It's major league. And then what is causing these feelings? And this is another key point of the theory of cognitive therapy, or TEAM CBT, and that's that all of your emotions result from only one cause, and that's your thoughts. And that idea has been around since the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, and the time of the Greek philosopher Epictetus, nearly 2,000 years ago. It's not the events of our lives. It's not the fact that she has 2 stuck patients. That's not the cause of her distress. It's her interpretation. It's what she's telling herself. And what she's telling herself, she's saying, I'm failing my patients. And she gives that 100. I should give them their money back. She believes that one 50%. I'm not competent enough to practice psychotherapy and should find a new career. How devastating is that? And I think on that one I'm seeing 60% belief. And then I should know what to say and how to help them and how to get them unstuck and feeling hopeful. And she believes that 80%. And I should extend the session a little longer and keep going on until they feel better. And that's a 90%. And then we'll see she has a whole slew of these negative thoughts. I should extend this session a little longer, and I think you'll find this on page 5 of your handouts, and beating up on herself in a variety of ways, and then very coming down to the bottom. I'm too slow and compulsive to help my patients. 80%. I'm a fraud and a failure. How devastating is that? And she believes that 100%. I'm a fraud and a failure. And then if anyone sees me in this video, they'll think that I'm not a competent shrink and won't want to work with me. And she believed that one 80%. And part of the magic of the daily mood log, and when I'm in my old age, I'm getting more and more irritable and willing to show my irritation, which is probably a poor choice because everyone thinks I'm so warm all the time and friendly, and I try to be. But when I hear of therapists who don't use the daily mood log and treat people with, oh, you should go out in nature and spend time with loved ones and all this bull crap that has been known for over 2,000 years to be just garbage, you need a daily mood log to find out what the person is thinking, because we all think differently. And these are the thoughts that are causing her distress. And that's where we want to target the therapy if we hope to bring Amy relief, and hopefully rapid relief, and hopefully rapid, profound relief. So there's one of my rants for the day. I'm sure my ratings just went down considerably. But anyway, that's how I feel. But to put it in a positive light, if you look at the negative thoughts of your patients or your loved ones or yourself when you're upset, you'll see the truth about what's really going on, and you'll know exactly where to focus your therapeutic efforts. Back to you, Jill.
Sure. So now that you guys have a glimpse of kind of who Amy is, we're going to walk through a couple things we did with Amy. And so before getting to the methods, right, before kind of working on challenging and changing the beliefs that are driving Amy's distress, we first are going to address some resistance. So we showed you how you can do a perfectionism cost-benefit analysis, but you also having that daily mood log in front of you after identifying the feelings and the negative thoughts. But before using any kind of change methods, we could turn to Amy and say, Amy, let's imagine that there was a magic button right here, right in front of you. And if you could press that magic button, you would instantly feel joy and self-esteem without any effort whatsoever. You know, you would feel fantastic right now in this moment. Would you press that button? And most patients say, yeah, show me the button, right? That's why I'm here. And Amy and some patients too actually had a more nuanced response, which was like, well, I'm not so sure. And that means that Amy actually understood what we were trying to say, which is there might be some good reasons for me to be so hard on myself. And so kind of we ask that magic button question and then move to positive reframing. So in Amy's case, we'd say, yeah, maybe it isn't a great idea to just press that button and instantly feel joy and self-esteem when you've got these two stuck patients. So we can say, we do have some really powerful techniques to share with you, Amy, but first let's just think a little bit. What do your thoughts and feelings show about you and your value system that's really positive and awesome? Can we talk about how some of these negative thoughts and negative emotions actually show something really beautiful about you? And can we also think for a moment about how your negative thoughts and feelings might actually be working for you, might be benefiting you? And so there are some similarities to this and the cost-benefit analysis, but we're going to invite you right now to enter in the chat box, and I can read some of your responses. What do Amy's negative thoughts and feelings show about her that's really beautiful and awesome, and how do her thoughts and feelings benefit her? David?
I just had a quick comment that this, again, is where TEAM goes in the diametrically opposite direction of most direction that most therapists and family members would go into, is to trying to help her, to cheer her up, to get her away from these terrible negative thoughts. And and painful feelings. We're not doing that, because that will only trigger up resistance. So instead, we're going to become the voice of her subconscious mind, the part of her that doesn't want to change, and we're going to give a respectful voice to that and talk about all the good reasons not to change. So it's the opposite of how 99% of mental health professionals are trained.
And so I've got a couple here I'll read. Just the negative thoughts and feelings show that she cares deeply about her patients and their well-being. And I got lots of people saying that she cares so much about her clients. I also got that shows that she's very hardworking, that she's dedicated to her patients. Some of her negative emotions show the depth of her compassion and her concern. They help her know areas that she might need to work on. Shows that she greatly cares about her clients, that she's honest about how helpful or not helpful she is. Shows her high standards, shows her to be a caring and passionate person, helps her to be alert to errors that she might be making or ways that she could improve. So there's lots more here. And I also just want to point out, you can turn, page 7 in your handout packet is where you can see the positive reframing tool. And we have a couple examples. You guys came up with so many amazing ones, but we can share with you a couple on the slide, and you can see a few more in the page 7 in your handout packet, that her high standards motivate her. Her beating up on herself shows her humility and also her honesty. I don't have to settle for mediocrity. Let's see, it keeps me from being my feelings of inadequacy keep me from being overly confident, keeps me humble. So I'm open to what I might be missing. Anything else you want to add here, David?
No, just to say, though, what a beautiful thing this is. And again, it's the opposite of the direction that our training takes us in, because we're supposed to diagnose mental disorders. We could say Amy has generalized anxiety disorder or obsessive compulsive personality disorder or something like that. And these diagnoses, while they have certainly some value to know the kinds of symptoms our patients struggle with and the differences between different kinds of problems that people have, they also have a tendency to trigger feelings of shame and the idea that somehow we've got to fight against these feelings and defeat them. And that's like trying to get out of one of these finger traps. The harder you try to pull against it, the tighter your fingers get trapped. And that's why in TEAM we always go in the opposite direction and try to see realistically, not as a gimmick, what's beautiful about the patient's suffering. And you can see that for absolute slam dunk certainty in Amy's case, that she is a beautiful, gentle human being, incredibly intelligent and gifted, but with fabulous high standards. And she's a humble person. She's someone, that's one thing I always loved about her in the Tuesday group. I didn't realize just what a star she was, but I always realized that she was always smart in what she said, but she was always humble and so easy to feel close to and to connect with and to feel comfortable with. And we want to bring out that beautiful side of the patient's suffering, whatever the patient's suffering happens to be.
And you guys did an amazing job of coming up with many examples, many positives in the chat box. A couple of people said, but perfectionism is so bad for you. And that is true. But the point of this exercise is first to align with all the positives and what it shows about the patient that's beautiful and awesome, because again, that's really where the resistance lies. Like, why would I not be able to give up my perfectionism if I know that it's hurting me? Why am I struggling to be kinder to myself? Because of all of the ways in which it's actually working for me. So after we get this good kind of hearty, true, beautiful list of all of the positives, then we can ask our patient what we call the pivot question, which is, given all these benefits, all these positive values, and we read them out loud to the patient authentically, why would you want to give up your depression, your guilt, your inadequacy? Why would you want to feel good about yourself? And in that sense, the therapist is siding with the voice of the resistance, right? We're reading this list of all the beautiful and saying, yeah, why in the world would you want to give this up? It sounds like it's working for you. And then paradoxically, the patient gets in the role of arguing for change, right? Like what some of you are putting in the chat box, like, but, it's hurting me and it's getting in my way and it's on my mind all the time. It's interfering in my ability to parent or to enjoy myself. I'm not sleeping well, right? And there you have the patient then really arguing for change. This is why I want to give it up. And once the patient is in the role of arguing for change, then we can say, that makes sense to me too. And so how about, instead of just pushing that button and getting rid of these negative feelings altogether, could we instead work to dial down these feelings to some level that really makes sense? We can hang on to some of the benefits, but also reduce some of your distress. And then we move back to the daily mood log, and we move to the goal column on the daily mood log. We're asking, how sad would you want to feel? What's the kind of the right amount of sadness where you're not going to be suffering so much, but you're going to hold on to your humility. You're going to keep yourself on your toes. And we're going to walk through each row of the emotions, asking how strong, how anxious and worried and nervous would you want to feel? Amy started at an 80, and she said that her goal was a 20. And guilty, remorseful, bad started at a 90, and she said her goal would be to bring that down to a 5. And her inadequacy and incompetence started at 100. She wanted to bring that down to a 15. She was feeling 90% discouraged. She wanted that to go down to a 5, and 80% stuck, and she wanted that to go down to a 5. And so at that point, Amy's aware that I'm not just trying to make myself feel better and get rid of everything willy-nilly, but like I actually understand that the right level of sadness or anxiety where I can hang on to some of my values, but also experience a lot less distress.
Yeah, she can see that, I want to feel 25% sad. I don't want to feel 0% sad when I have 2 stuck patients. And so it's such a beautiful thing. And I would say that Freud spent his career trying to understand resistance and trying to develop a technique to analyze and reduce resistance. And he came up with 5 days a week on the analyst's couch, free associating. But the Freudian formulations to resistance are interesting and a tremendous intellectual achievement, but I'm not aware of them being very helpful. And again, I hate to say this because it sounds critical and people will probably bust me for saying it, but what we've developed is a method for dealing with resistance in a therapy session in 30 minutes rather than many years. And so the patient can let go. And the paradox is that the very moment the patient really sees the beauty in his or her symptoms, which is not the Freudian view of resistance at all. This is radically different way of looking at it. The moment they get that, then rapid and dramatic recovery is just a stone's throw away. And that's a paradox. And the paradox is that when the therapist, this is called the death of the therapist's helping self. That's one of the 4 deaths of the self in TEAM CBT. And the moment you let go of that and see the world through the patient's eyes and see why the patient has all of these symptoms in a positive and caring way, it melts away the resistance. And then the patient becomes a partner when we come to methods, and we can generally blow the negative thoughts out of the water very quickly.
And oftentimes people ask this, so I'll answer this question now. Well, in Amy's case, when we offered that magic button, she said, I'm not sure. And then we lowered the resistance. But if someone answers, yes, show me the button, then we still do exactly the same sequence. We say, Yes, I love that for you too. I can totally understand why you'd want to feel no longer depressed and anxious. But before we do that, I'd like to invite you to think with me a little bit about how these might be serving you well. So we still go to positive reframing. So whether they want to push the button or they're skeptical about the button, it doesn't matter. We move into positive reframing, the pivot question, and then the magic dial. David, we're going to move on now and leave agenda setting or assessment of resistance, as we say, and actually share with you a whole bunch of methods right now for addressing perfectionism.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borovsky, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.